Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Good, good. You know, this has been really great being at this conference because we really are familia. Just talking to Chris about Las Cruces and people that we know together, and Jeremy, Arizona Wildcat back there. So we share a lot of. Who said boo? They must be from ASU. So we are familia. So it's been great getting to meet some of you people. Hold on a second here. We're going to dim the lights here, and I always say dim the lights so you can't see really what I'm doing up here, but your focus is going to be elsewhere. Great. Okay. This is Jorge Ledesma. He lives in West Jefferson, North Carolina. He is a Christmas tree farmer. That Fraser fir that you might have purchased last year just might have been grown by him from a seedling in a bed, where the smallest sprouts are placed together at the bottom of a hill to a mature tree, one of thousands that line the hillsides in the western part of this state. Jorge came to the United States as a teenager back in the 1980s. His brother had lived here, and when the family needed money, he came back to retrieve a teenage Jorge. They crossed illegally into Texas at a time when there was no cell phones. As Jorge described it to my wife, Anne, his mother spent many fearful weeks wondering whether he and his brother were even alive. Jorge worked the fields in Texas and then Florida and received the amnesty offered by the Reagan administration back in the late 1980s. He headed up to North Carolina to work the Christmas trees and became such a valuable asset to his boss, Ron Hudler, that he is now one of his most valuable employees. Jorge manages the migrant workers who come to cut and package the trees that we buy for our living rooms. Every September, his phone begins to ring. Men and women who want work harvesting the trees call him looking for a job. Now, he is in a position not just to employ them or to refuse them. One of the things Jorge says is, I could take. By that, he means he could take something from each one of them for workers that he places, payment for getting them a job. But he doesn't. He was a migrant once. He was forced to pay for a job more than once. He sees himself in the people that he hires. Jorge works for a large tree farmer, but he is also his own boss. He spent the last couple of decades learning the business. He has invested in his own lots of trees. In some cases, he owns the land. In others, just the trees. He hopes one day to have one of his trees in the White House like his boss has had. Jorge has 3 children. He sees his children as both Mexican and American, and this is perplexing for him. Because he is an American citizen, he is able to travel back to Mexico in late December and January every year when he works, takes a hiatus. The children know Mexico. They spend time on the family farm and ranch there. But he knows that they are more American, much more than he is. Jorge has also brought other family to the States. His parents spend much of their time living in a trailer next to his house. His dad and brothers also own trees, and they help each other maintain, harvest, and sell them. But Jorge doesn't want his children to farm. At this point, even his youngest child is poised to surpass his own 6th grade education. He wants them to go on to school and have a career. Farming for them should be something they can do on the side if they want to. Jorge says he has had a good life working in the fields, but it is a hard life, and he wants something more for himself. Jorge Ledesma is just one of the many inspiring people I have met since coming to North Carolina. My name is José Gálvez, and I have been documenting Latino life in the United States for more than 40 years, not 50. Pretty soon it's going to be 50. I want to thank NALCAB for inviting me to come talk to you today. I also want to congratulate you for all the fine work you are doing in communities all across this country. You're in your 2nd decade of service, and it's only going to get better. Keep it up. I also want to thank Jeremy Carter, who first contacted me. Mil gracias, Jeremy. Before I tell you more about me, I'd like to say that some of the next photos you'll see are ones I've shot over my whole career. Some of these photographs go back to the late 1960s. Near the end of my talk, we'll return to my recent work here in North Carolina. I hope that as my photographs progress, you'll see the continuity as well as the changes in my work. As I said, my name is José Gálvez. I am Mexican American. I'm of Mexican descent, but I was born in the United States, in Tucson, as a matter of fact. My parents were also born in southern Arizona. Most of my grandparents were too. Well, before that, though, the land was all in parts of Mexico. I come from a family with names like Pepe and Chata and Güero. I don't think I've ever worn a sombrero or sarape like you see on Pedro down at south of the border, near the South Carolina border. I'm very much a product of the border. I grew up in the Mexican barrios of Tucson, where until I went to school, I heard and spoke mostly Spanish. We lived in a small two-room adobe casita with my grandparents. We all slept in one bedroom. Mis abuelos, they slept underneath a window. In the summer times, that was the coolest part of the house. My parents had their bed on one side of the room, and us boys, we had our bed on the other side. We were rather small, so it was a comfortable fit for the three of us. The other room consisted of the kitchen and eating area. Now, this was my favorite room. I would watch my nana make her caldos, empanada, and paper tin tortillas. She listened to her favorite Mexican radio station. You were just talking about that earlier. Mm-hmm. Our little house was built next to the big house where my uncle and aunt, mi tía Mercy and tía Avelino, and mis primos lived. I think you might have already seen a picture of my tía Mercy previously. My father, he wasn't around much. He was a working man. He worked on the railroads. For a while, he was a lumberjack in the Pacific Northwest, and that's always been an image that struck with me. You know, a Mexicano out there chopping down the big trees. How do you say timber in Spanish? I don't know. He was also a farm worker following the crops across the Southwest. In fact, one of the times I felt closest to him was in the summer times when we would go out with him to pick cotton in the fields near Tucson. He drank and did a stint in jail. For what? I never asked, and to this day I still don't know. I remember him coming home from jail with these little foil animals that he'd crafted from the inside of gum wrappers. I was named for him. Unfortunately, he died when I was 12. My mother, Lupe, had her hands full with the four of us, and her hands weren't strong. You know, she suffered from arthritis and epilepsy all her life and didn't work outside the house. The only non-Mexicans that I came in contact with back in those days were my school teachers. And while they left an impression on me, it wasn't always a good one. You see, speaking Spanish at school got you a slap on the hand with a ruler and a timeout in the corner of the classroom. This was the mid-1950s, and there was no such thing as bilingual education back then. We moved when I was around 10 to an apartment a few blocks from downtown Tucson. Have any of you ever made a move that totally changed the person that you've become? You know, we weren't moving too far from my old barrio, maybe just a couple of miles. My brother and I still walked over to my nana's on weekends, but it was a whole new world for me, and it would change my life. My new neighborhood was called Barrio Viejo. It shared a lot of similarities with my old barrio. Most of the families were still Mexican, but in my school I now had black and Anglo schoolmates. Though not very many, probably no more than a couple of handfuls. There were more stores in the neighborhood, mostly run by Chinese merchants. In the early mornings, you could smell the bread and the panes and the tortillas and the conchas being baked in the Mexican panderias nearby. Downtown became my new playground. I was a natural-born hustler. I sold newspapers, retrieved empty soda and beer bottles for their deposits. I collected boxes of the Mexican panderia. I scoured the dump for torn comic books and sold them to my friends for a dime. On Sundays, I made a small fortune selling newspapers outside the Catholic Church. But most of all, I shined. Shoes, that is. My dad had made me a shoe shine box after weeks of my pestering him for one. I had seen other boys with shoe shine boxes downtown, and my new friend Mike Tatum told me that he made about $1 a day doing so. Now, that was a lot of money back then. For $1. I mean, you could go to the movies for a quarter. Cokes cost a dime. Candy bars cost a nickel. And I still had some change left over. Wow. It reminds me, when I would collect the boxes for the panderia, the pandero would always give me a cookie for each box that I would take to him. I always like to think, which one of these boys was I? I always like to think he's the boy in the checkered pants, not because of his taste in the pants, but because he's looking out. I took that shoe shine box all over the place. I went into the bars and restaurants. I went in and out of the office buildings. I chased down men on the sidewalk. Shine, mister. It's only a dime. I cleaned the shoes for both the Mexican men getting ready for their Saturday nights out and for the Anglo businessmen on their lunchtime breaks. One night, I was hanging out at the service station behind the newspaper building when Buster Dodazo got a phone call. There was a reporter that was calling and asking for that little shoe shine boy. Could he send him up? Well, up until that time, the only part of the newspaper building that I was familiar with was a loading dock, where I would pick up my newspapers that I sold in the streets after school. I had never once been inside the rest of the building. I grabbed my box, I went around to the front of the building and entered the building. To find the newsroom, I had to go up a few flights of stairs. At the top, I opened the doors to my future. That shoe shine box changed my life. I found my destiny that evening. I found a whole new set of mentors, and I found a new place, the newsroom, that would become the center of my life for more than 3 decades. Here were the people who wrote the stories for the papers that I sold on the streets. Men in white shirts and ties were talking to telephones, asking a barrage of questions. At other desk, editors were scribbling and erasing and typing. In a small room, machines were running on their own, spinning out reams of paper, the first beginning of the internet, called the teletype machines. There was an energy and electricity in the room that was exciting to watch. It hit me, standing right there on that spot, that I wanted to be one of them. Instead of selling the newspapers on the street, I wanted to be part of making it. I found the reporter that had called for me. His name was Ed Gallardo, and he was one of the few Mexican-American reporters at the time. Well, after that night, they couldn't get rid of me. Every evening after the downtown businesses closed and the streets grew quiet, I climbed those stairs and entered that building. I made myself useful. Sometimes I shined shoes. Sometimes I ran errands. Sometimes I just sat and watched, taking it all in. The people there became my mentors, and after my father died, they became my father figures, educated me and guided me on my path. Finally, they hired me as a copy boy when I turned 16. And, I had some obstacles along the way. No one in my family valued education. My mother, my own mother, would yell at me to turn off the lights late at night when I was studying because it was costing her money. She was also raised in the Mexican way that taught her that improving yourself was a sign of being ambioso, ambitious. And for Mexicans, the word ambioso is intended as an insult. You're too big for your pants. You're trying too hard. You're showing off. It wasn't hard to find other people also standing in my way. One evening, I was shining a professional man's shoes. He was a professional Anglo businessman. He was looking me over, studying me up and down. You're just a poor little Mexican boy, aren't you? Well, I don't think he was expecting an answer. I think it was just a comment based on his observation. It had never been pointed out to me before that we were poor. My family was no different than the other families around us. We watched television in the living room like other families. We had new clothes to wear at the beginning of the school year. We had food to eat. Well, that television set was an old black and white TV set. Those clothes were to last us for the whole school year, and you can imagine what they were like after a few weeks of constant wear. That food was often government handouts of processed cheese, powdered milk, or some canned mystery meat. I cried softly as I finished up his shoes. Yeah, I might be poor, but I'm going to make something of myself. Years later, when I got to high school, I had a meeting with my high school counselor. When he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I told him, I want to be a journalist. He began to hem and haw. Well, to be a journalist requires going to good college, and it's not really in your future, he said. It takes studying and good English, and you're not really cut out for it. Well, that meant he could have killed my dreams, and I thank God every day that I already had a lot of experience with journalism. I hung out in that newsroom every night, By this time, I had been hanging out in the newsroom for 5, 6, 7 years. Those reporters and editors were pushing me to go on to college. They talked about how someday I would be working with them. Well, that guidance counselor, however, was either trying to keep me down or maybe he thought he had my best interests at heart. And in some ways, he unknowingly led me to my destiny. He suggested that since reporting was beyond my capability, I should consider the blue-collar side of the business, something more suited to my ethnicity. He suggested I take the print shop and learn to run the print press. Well, luckily for me, the print shop also included photography. Little did he or I know that it would become my life's passion. Within weeks of my starting to take that class, I bought my first camera at a pawn shop and began taking pictures of my family and mi barrio. I went on to college. I was the first college graduate on either side of my families. And as the newspaper editors and reporters said, I did work with them side by side after graduation, becoming a staff photographer for the newspaper. I photographed everything: sports, celebrities coming through town, little kids running through sprinklers. But what I loved photographing the most was mi cultura, mi gente, and the barrio. There's an old piece of advice given to writers: write what you know about. Well, I was photographing what I knew about. I served as an unofficial Chicano movement photographer. We identified ourselves as Chicano. We were fighting for our barrios, for our children's right to an equal education, for the rights of grape workers to earn a decent wage. We took so much of our inspiration from the civil rights movement, and similarly we later protested the war in Vietnam, where black and brown boys were overwhelmingly drafted before others. One of the ironies of growing up and becoming a fairly decent photographer was that there wasn't a camera in our family when we were growing up. I have only one picture of my grandparents, and only a couple of pictures of me and my siblings shot at a downtown department store. I have no photographs of my parents together. I keep thinking someday I'm going to Photoshop them into different combinations. Here's my parents at their wedding days. Here's the family at a family picnic. So maybe I photograph today to make up for all those lost photographs. That little mocosa boy that you saw earlier, or maybe that's what I looked like when I was a kid. That hard-working man shoveling dirt, or maybe he reminds me of my father. These hard-working women, or maybe one of them was one of my tias. This is what I do. These are photographs of my wider family, a family that I'm proud of, people that I respect, who live lives that I believe are beautiful. In 1980, I left Tucson for the Los Angeles Times. I was the first Mexican-American photographer on staff at the LA Times. I walked the barrios every week taking photographs, and I had to argue to get them into the paper. Mexicans don't read our paper, we were always being told. These are some of the pictures from that Pulitzer series. Ultimately, my colleagues and I fought to get a series on Latinos into the paper. We faced derision and from other staff and criticism. And I'm proud to say that we were the first Chicanos to win a Pulitzer Prize for our work. I no longer work for a newspaper, but I've never stopped photographing. And I've never stopped photographing anything but everyday Latino life. This move to North Carolina more than 8 years ago now was one of the most adventuresome things I've ever done. We'd come through here a few years earlier, and my wife, who grew up in Virginia and spent a lot of time here, was shocked at how many Latinos were here. These are from some of the other projects that I've worked on. First of all, I want to point out, where did all these trees come from? This is quite disorientated for this desert boy. I was talking to a few other people, and they keep asking me, well, how do you like it out here? And I sort of like pause and say, well, A lot of trees out here, a lot of trees, real green. You know, I miss the Southwest. And also, I can't find a good flour tortilla just about anywhere. Although I did go to a restaurant last night where the lady actually made them fresh, and they were quite excellent. This is El Paso, September 13, 2011. 2001. And from a personal perspective, there are very few American-born Latinos like me out here. Oh, let me rephrase that. There are very few American-born Latinos that are my age. Lots of the kids have been born here, and some of them are now becoming parents. But there are very few gray mustache Chicanos walking around these parts. There are, however, plenty of immigrantes. In fact, North Carolina has had the second biggest increase in Latino immigrant population in recent years. All the states in the South have experienced this growth, as you well know. One of the first things that struck me and my wife was the impact of Latinos on the landscape. We saw signs in Spanish. We saw businesses. We saw people, lots of people waiting for buses, in line at Old Navy, building houses, paving roads, eating at Chinese buffets. One of our questions was, how are immigrantes adapting to a new place? How are they getting what they need? How do they find the foods that they like, or their quinceañera dress, or the cowboy boots? For instance, a few months after we came here, we were on Country County Road near Mount Olive when we saw a homemade sign propped up on the window of a shed that's read, Decoraciones Yolanda. We made a quick U-turn, pulled into a small lot with trailers, and a woman came out to see what we were up to. A few weeks later, I made a trip back to photograph as a girl was taught by the seamstress who owned this little business how to embellish her own quinceañera dress. Later, she would be having her quinceañera at a Baptist church, not as you might expect, a Catholic one. The faith community out here has learned to adapt to some of these cultural traditions to keep the young people interested in faith. These sorts of observations led me to a focused photography project, which actually was funded partially by NALCAB. So I thank you, NALCAB, for that partial funding. Ann and I received a grant to study Latino entrepreneurs here in North Carolina. You heard me talk about Jorge Ledesma earlier. Then there's Gustavo Rudea, who came as a 19-year-old and went to work on a turkey farm. He was frustrated with watching other workers rest while he worked simply because he couldn't speak English and couldn't tell the boss this. He's going to be coming up in just a few seconds here. Gustavo was determined to change that. He would work all night long putting the turkeys onto trucks, then return home at 7 in the morning. He would take a class, he would shower, eat quickly, and then head off to a morning ESL class at the local community college. He did this for 3 months straight. His hard-earned bilingualism and selling smarts led him to his destiny. One day at the swap meet, he saw an Americano selling used furniture. Well, this man didn't speak Spanish, but most of his customer base was Hispanic. Gustavo offered his skills, and this began a career selling furniture. He now owns 2 furniture stores down in this little town called Warsaw in Wilmington here in North Carolina. He's also an employer and a member of the local Chamber of Commerce. A few statistics from a recent report from the North Carolina Governor's Office of Hispanic Latino Affairs, which our governor and legislature has just voted to close. Not a very smart decision, I think, in my estimation. In 1990, Latinos made up 1.7% of North Carolina's population. In 2010, that percentage had increased to 8.7%. 800,000 people. There are more than 21,000 Latino-owned businesses in North Carolina, employing more than 34,000 people. And they have an annual business receipts of $4.2 billion. This is Gustavo. These are 2007 figures. but there are probably much more now. There are so many stories like Gustavo's and Jorge's, and I'm privileged to have been able to travel the state and to document the amazing lives being lived by Latinos here. You'll see this picture up here on my little exhibit. He still goes to the swap meet. He has a trailer that he pulls and takes out samples of what he carries in the store, but he also has show books where people can look at the photographs and order from the catalog. This young man, his father owns a tire rim shop, and his dream was to go on to graduate school and learn more business practices so that he can expand the business. And he now actually has a much bigger shop with lifts and racks that you can drive the cars into. Patricia Castillo and her father Ricardo, they make paletas, Mexican popsicles in Oakboro, which is probably about 20 miles from here, which, if you haven't been there, is a 1 traffic light, maybe 2. This is Ana Aguila. Her father Maximiliano works at the American Airlines Terminal, RDU. Whenever I head out on a trip, I walk the terminal looking for him. My wife thinks that maybe he could be my uncle. His daughter Ana and he sing the old Mexican songs that my nana loved and that I miss hearing at taquerias and special events. These are kids practicing for a quinceañera celebration, a girl's 15th birthday, which is celebrated to the max as almost like a debut or coming out party. But before the party takes place, the kids have to learn a fairly complex choreography. The girl chooses a large number of male attendants, and in some cases they dance. Here are the kids that you saw them practicing in the Ramada. But one of the most important parts of that picture that wasn't in it is a teacher who was standing out of the shot directing the kids. Her name was Patricia Miranda, who was only 17 years old at the time. One day she wants to open up her own dance studio, and I think that she'll succeed. I'm just amazed at how she got all these kids, black and brown and white, to all take it so seriously. Or then you just saw a picture of the Solorzano brothers, who work construction, but opened a Western clothing store in Durham. While they continue to build, their wives run the store and their children have grown up underneath the racks. Even after 8 years, I still feel a little bit out of place here in North Carolina, but my role is still very much the same. I keep on photographing. And these days I take the photographs to places like libraries and schools and universities where they serve to educate. I've been to Ohio, Florida, Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, and of course all over North Carolina. I take the photographs to Latino fiestas and lowrider shows and to the professional organizations. I'm a bridge. I'm bilingual. I speak English and Spanish. I'm Mexican, but I'm also American. I've worked in the white-collar world, but as a child I picked cotton to help feed my family. I'm middle class now, but I come from poverty. My job is to do 2 things. I photograph to show Latinos themselves and to say that you are living beautiful lives. I do this with respect and love and with a desire to safeguard the dignity of people who trust me with their images. As Luis Urrea said in his poem in my book, Vatos, I want to say with these photographs, you are not forgotten. You are not ignored. I see you. I admire you and respect you. Your hard, back-breaking work, your drive to succeed, your love for your families. I want you to walk away from here empowered. You are changing this place, and you are being changed by it. Culture, language, food, music, faith, sports. You are giving and taking. We are passing things back and forth, and we're all better because of the diversity. My second job is to take the work to the non-Latino audiences. My hope is that you non-Hispanic viewers will see a picture that you like, that you will be moved to understanding, that the image will somehow touch you, that in a way that words can't and that rhetoric can't. And I hope that the next time that you hear Spanish in the next aisle at Target or pass a group of Latino construction workers on the road, you'll have a new sense of empathy and a desire to overcome that reluctance to get to know someone because they seem foreign or hard to understand. Maybe when you drive by a taqueria now, you'll make that U and go in and try something new and different, and understand that the person working behind that counter might very well wind up owning that business. And so I say to you now, keep it up. Whatever the challenges, and I'm sure there are many, keep it up. Even if the nature of your work means that you're grown fond, the people that you've grown fond of might never come back and you wonder what happened to them, keep it up. Even if you never see the good fruit of your efforts, keep it up. Believe that the good that you do today radiates out. It may radiate out years later when a grandparent repeats your words to encourage a grandchild. It may radiate in the helpful, hopeful steps of a new college graduate. It may radiate when someone you've reached out because you reached out to them. It may very well radiate in a time and place where you will never know, among other people you will never see again. Much like the people you assist, you are planting seeds. Those seeds may stay dormant, and they may grow up only to be harvested far away from you, but they are good seed. Don't lose faith. Keep it up. My name is José Gálvez. I'm Mexican. I'm American. I'm a husband, a father, and an old documentary photographer, capturing the everyday lives of Latinos across this great land of ours, con respecto y con corazón. I like to end with the words of St. Francis de Sales. Be who you are, and be that well. And while you're at it, shine. Thank you for listening to my story, and have a great remainder of the time that you're here. I'm honored to have been here with you. Thank you.